Hi everybody, Andrew here back for another Barista Basics video. Now before I get into today's topic, I need to make a quick disclaimer that any opinions stated in these videos are my own. I am not here trying to represent Starbucks or any other company or impede on any of these companies' trademarks or intellectual property. I am just making these videos for fun and educational purposes. So with that said, let's go ahead and get into today's topic, which is the anatomy of a coffee cherry. And so the coffee cherry is actually the fruit that the coffee bean we know and love originates from. Now, these coffee cherries grow on trees, and these trees take about 3 to 5 years to mature so that they can start producing these coffee cherry fruits. Now, these trees are a great investment for farmers in regions of the world where coffee is best grown, because once these trees have reached maturation and have started producing these coffee cherries, they can be harvested for many years to come because they will continuously produce these coffee cherries when in season. So with that said, let's go ahead and get into the actual meat of today's topic, which is the anatomy of a coffee cherry. And so I have here a colored and numbered diagram of the 6 components of a coffee cherry, and I'm going to describe each one of these components and start from the outermost layer and work my way in. So starting with the outermost layer, this is the exocarp, and this is the protection for the inside of the coffee cherry from the external environment. It is a thick and the hardest layer, and it is colored red in this diagram because it actually is red when the coffee cherries are ready to, when they're ripe, when they're ready to harvest. They originally start when they grow as a more green color, but they become more red as they reach that point of ripeness. So moving on to our next layer, this is the mesocarp, and this is a pulpy and squishy layer that essentially just acts as a barrier between the exocarp and the next layer that I'm about to discuss, which is the parenchyma, also known as the mucilage. And so this is the thickest layer of the coffee cherry. This is the component that makes up the majority of the coffee cherry, and this has a consistency pretty similar to honey. It has a similar viscosity and is similarly pretty sticky as well. And that is due to the amount of pectin in this layer. And you may have heard the term pectin before. It is a polysaccharide, a sugar that is most commonly used in jams and fruit preserves because it acts as a thickener and helps simply just to increase cohesion in these fruit products. Moving on to our next layer, this is the endocarp, which is also simply known as the parchment. And this serves a similar function to the mesocarp, wherein it acts just as another separation, another barrier of the mucilage from the more internal contents of the coffee cherry. Now, these more internal contents are the spermaderm and the coffee bean itself. The spermaderm is also more commonly known as the silver skin, and this is just another thin membrane that surrounds each individual coffee bean. So the parchment is a membrane that surrounds both coffee beans, and the silver skin is the membrane that surrounds each individual bean. So moving on to our our most important component of the coffee cherry, the coffee bean itself. Now, as I mentioned, this is actually the seed. They are the seeds of the coffee cherry fruit. I have them colored green in the diagram because these seeds are actually green when they're harvested. They turn more brittle and brown due to the processing and the roasting of these coffee beans, these coffee seeds. Now, there are 2 pictured in the diagram because this is the most common way that you will discover a coffee cherry is with 2 coffee beans in them. Now, however, there is a natural mutation that can occur, which the mutation is that only one of these coffee seeds gets fertilized, and so only one of them will mature. And when this happens, it is called a pea berry because as opposed to being flat, like the two coffee beans that are normally found in a coffee cherry, since there's only one, it is actually more spherical, more round, comparable to that of a pea, hence the name pea berry. So if you've ever seen any products with the name pea berry in it, that is what it is. It is the same thing as a coffee cherry, essentially, as a coffee bean rather, pardon me, except instead of two coffee beans in a coffee cherry, there is only one. Now, a key difference, however, between coffee beans, coffee seeds, and pea berries is that pea berries are thought by some to be sweeter and more flavorful than coffee beans. Exactly why, nobody is quite sure. There are some people that even don't agree with that statement, but I figured that would be worth mentioning because that is something that certain companies or certain products try to claim. So that is useful knowledge to know. But with that said, I believe that should be all for today's video. I'll go ahead and give a zoom in on the diagram itself so we can distinguish all of these colors. And I also might as well go ahead and give a close-up of the key for the diagram, the 6 components of a coffee cherry. So to review, we have the exocarp, the mesocarp, the mucilage, the endocarp, the silver skin, and the coffee seed itself. So, with that said, that is all for today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed that video. I hope you guys learned something, and I hope that you guys have a great day. Thanks so much for checking it out. Thank you so much.